Side Chapter 57, An Imperfect Utopia.
Rikyudo, who had been buried by the collapsed wall, stood up with an astonished expression on his face. Impossible, someone who has become a god, was knocked down. Not by Amamiya, not by Amamiya Hiroto who has possessed his daughter, but by a mere brat.
He had been blasted into a wall by a single spell. He might have understood if this had been done by Amamiya Hiroto, whom he had regarded as his greatest threat until very recently, or Amamiya Hiroto, whom he had very recently realized was the true threat. But it was Amamiya Hiroshi, Amamiya Hiroto's son, who had done this.
Learned your lesson yet, you baldy-do?
Hiroshi said, taunting him. As far as Rikyudo knew, Amamiya Hiroshi wasn't special. His investigations had concluded that the cheat-like abilities and fortunes of reincarnated individuals weren't inherited through blood. Physical qualities were inherited, but nothing else. The children of reincarnated individuals were more likely to have talent than other children, but there were plenty of other children in the world who were just as remarkable. Amamiya Hiroshi was no exception to that. It was true that in 10 years' time, he would have become a fine warrior who wasn't at all inferior to the Bravers, other than the lack of a cheat-like ability. He might have even become a police investigator, scientist, or mage that Rikyudo would have to be wary of. But as he was now, he was just a boy. Even though he stood out from other children of his age, there was no way he was supposed to be anything other than a speck of dust before the Arch-Avalon, Rikyudo.
You bastard, how?
Rikyudo began to utter, but he groaned and coughed up blood. He clutched his chest, where Hiroshi's mana bullet had landed a direct hit. His ribs were broken, and one of the bones had punctured his lung. He was even more astounded as he realized this. If I didn't immediately cast a barrier, he might have crushed even my heart and my lungs, not just my ribs. I have become a god, how is this possible? I see, I understand now.
Rikyudo-san!
Moriya shouted in alarm.
No need to worry, Moriya. A wound like this will heal right away.
Said Rikyudo. He had never been able to cast life attribute magic, and currently, he couldn't cast healing magic of the other attributes either. But Rikyudo had known from the very beginning that the Arch-Avalon body would be unable to cast healing magic, so it had been cultivated with measures incorporated to make up for that weakness. Though the healing was a little slower than Rikyudo had expected, his lung and his ribs were regenerating with incredible speed.
Dad, are you alright? Are you hurt?
Asked Hiroshi.
Yeah, I'm fine, Hiroshi.
Amamiya replied.
More importantly, that form of yours, it's the same as our suits, I suppose. Did he give them to you?
Yeah, I wanted one more like the ones you guys are wearing, but Banda said that this one is specialized for defense.
Hiroshi looked more like a villain than Rikyudo, but Amamiya felt at ease after this short conversation with him.
I see, if he said that it's specialized for defense, then you'll be fine.
Amamiya said.
But doesn't it look lame? That Banda, I bet he's under the impression that having more eyes is cool.
Hiroshi complained.
It's not lame. Lots of manga and movies these days have characters who look like they're bad guys but have kind hearts, don't they? You're just like one of those.
Dad, there's a limit to how much characters like that should look like bad guys.
Sorry to interrupt your father-son conversation, but shouldn't we take this opportunity to follow up with more attacks?
Suggested Banda, appearing from the hole that Hiroshi had created. Mari followed Banda through the hole, and Mei was inside him.
Papa, I think Nick-chan would look even cooler if he had wriggles.
Said Mei.
Ah, it's you. Thank you for giving Hiroshi a suit as well. Where are the victims you went to rescue, and where are Ulrika and the others?
Asked Hiroto.
I had Hiroshi help me create a safe area for them. Laboratories of evil mages are quite nice, aren't they? There's no shortage of usable materials.
Said Banda. There wasn't a single room in this facility with proper defenses against death attribute magic, such as Rikyudo's shockwave of death. Thus, Banda had created an impromptu anti-death attribute shelter by having Hiroshi peel parts of his transformation equipment off so that he could apply them its materials to the floor and walls, and taking all the useful materials he could find from the laboratories to enchant them with alchemy.
I've left Ulrika with them in case anything unexpected occurs, and Gabriel is with her to keep her calm. Even if Rikudu releases another shockwave of death, they'll be fine.
Banda said as he looked around to assess the situation.
Hiroshi, could you please go and help Bakar and Yukijaro? Their transformation equipment isn't as durable as yours.
Am I really allowed to?
Said Hiroshi.
Yes, I'll explain things to your parents.
Said Banda.
May will tell them too.
Said May.
I mean, my dad is right there.
Said Hiroshi. Amamiya watched his son lumber off with a dry smile on his face. Hiroshi's defense-specialized transformation equipment was also exceptionally protective against cold temperatures, so he was able to switch places with Bakar without any problems to fight against Ymir, the artificial spirit of icy air that Moria had created. Banda had also tasked Hiroshi with this opponent out of consideration. Although Rikudu had a different form now, he was still someone that Hiroshi had once looked up to. Rather than have Hiroshi continue to fight Rikudu, it would be less stressful for Hiroshi to fight against Ymir, an artificial being that was made of mana.
Thanks.
Amamiya said, knowing that this was the case.
More importantly, aren't you going to use the magic that combines life attribute magic and light attribute magic?
Asked Banda, brushing off Amamiya's gratitude.
The magic that you used when the Federal States Department of Defense building was covered in Pluto's death attribute mana. I think that should be able to deal with Rikudu's death attribute magic.
Banda believed that if it was based on the same principle as the anti-death attribute magic used by the blue-flamed sword, Heinz, then it would be able to break through Rikudu's barriers without any difficulties.
Unfortunately, that's not possible. In order to use that, I need to use all my concentration on converging two attributes into one and maintaining that convergence. I wouldn't be able to do anything else.
Said Amamiya.
Back then, there was no caster to worry about, so all I had to do was ram my own mana into the rampaging mana in the air, but it won't work on a moving enemy like Rikudu.
Banda said in conclusion.
Even if you wanted to be more proficient with it, there wasn't any opportunity for you to use it either. Rikudu always assigned other people to undead-related missions. I suppose he didn't want you to gain a trump card against him.
Said Mari. Indeed, after the destruction of the 8th guidance, the only death attribute mana remaining in the world was the mana in death attribute magic items that had been created in the past. None of Amamiya's missions had required him to face death attribute magic, so there had essentially been no need for him to hone this skill. And with the exception of Pluto's mana that rampaged out of control, Amamiya's other weapons and spells of the other attributes had been sufficient to deal with limited death attribute mages, so there had been no need for him to focus on improving this magic.
I did do a little training after hearing that there seemed to be remnants of the 8th guidance around, and I can move a little while using it, but it will be difficult to use against Rikudu. Sorry to disappoint you.
Said Amamiya.
You might be able to use it a little better with that equipment.
Said Banda.
I'm confident in its performance as a magical medium. I see, I'll give it a try.
Said Amamiya.
Have you finished talking?
Said Rikudu, whose wounds had healed during Amamiya and Banda's conversation.
I would like to have a word with the world's first death attribute mage, and the failed creation that contributed to the creation of Archavalon, you see.
I have nothing to say to you.
Said Banda.
Nor do I.
Said Amamiya.
It'd be shameful to voice my grudges against you in front of my children.
I see, how disappointing. I wanted my forebearer to witness my magic skills like this.
Rikudu released another black shockwave of death, as if for show. But Amamiya and the others weren't fazed by this, as they already knew that it was ineffective against them. But Banda tapped one of his jointed legs against the floor in irritation. This had increased the burden on Vandalu's soul, which was spread around the outside of this facility. And not only that, other fighter aircraft deployed from other regions were flying around like flies as well. He wanted to enter the facility to break Rikyudo's soul, but he was now unable to do that.
What do you think? I'm sure that you on the outside will be able to block it, but it's still quite impressive, isn't it? I don't think you or that failed creation that's with you can use this spell.
Rikyudo said with an air of superiority.
Well, it's true that I can't use it,
Said Banda. May made a vexed noise, giving Rikyudo an irritated look in Banda's place. Banda's inner emotions were clear, as May was expressing them for him. And as Rikyudo said, Shockwave of Death was a spell that neither Banda nor Vandalyu could use.
I have far too much mana, so my control over it isn't good enough. You've excluded your subordinates from being targeted by the spell, but I wouldn't be able to do anything as tricky as that. If I were to use this spell, it would become an indiscriminate attack of mass destruction that reaches further than I intend it to. That's the only reason I can't use it.
Banda explained. The only reason Banda and Vandalyu couldn't use the spell was because it wasn't a viable option of attack. If Vandalyu were to do the same thing in Lambda, unleashing a shockwave of death containing over 10 billion mana in all directions, it was highly likely that it would affect not only completely unrelated people, but his own companions as well. In addition to that, the shockwave of death was nothing more than a very crude attack. It was a wide-range, indiscriminate attack that weak enemies would have no hope of escaping, but to the powerful enemies that Vandalyu was wary of, it was nothing more than a crude attack that spread a vast amount of mana very thin. They would be able to avoid it with ease, either by conjuring barriers or by casting attack spells to create holes in the shockwave that they could safely pass through. It might have been able to kill Heinz and his companions before they entered the Dungeon of Trials, for instance, but it would never work against them as they were now. Rather than sacrificing his own allies to use such a crude spell, it was far more effective to fight using directed, focused spells and fragments of the Demon King.
Well, I don't think it's wrong for you to use it. It has suppressed my main body at the cost of only a small amount of mana. It's crafty, but it's the right decision in your current position.
Banda said.
You're quite the harsh critic.
Said Rikyudo. His pride seemed to be wounded, but he kept his composure, only frowning a little in response to these words.
Not as harsh as you, thinking that you're so high and mighty while calling Mari a failed creation.
Said Banda. These words created a larger crack in Rikyudo's self-restraint.
What do you mean by that? Are you trying to say that I, Archavalon, am the same as that failed creation over there?
He shouted. His previous self, the one that had kept his ambitions a secret and separated his public persona and real persona for over 10 years after encountering the undead, wouldn't have been shaken by words like these. But Archavalon had achieved his own reincarnation and attained a power that was far beyond anything he had possessed previously. It wasn't just his body that had changed, his mind had undergone changes as well. He no longer possessed the self-restraint that he had in the past.
You're nothing but a child's puppet. Very well, I shall kill Amamiya, the one controlling you, and once your lingering presence is erased from this world, I'll become its sole death attribute mage.
Rikyudo declared.
Not only are you calling Mari a failed creation, but you're accusing Mechon of controlling me as well. You're irritating me so much that I'm starting to want to kill you.
Said Banda. He was reaching the end of his patience as well. As he was a part of Vandalyu, he had the same personality. In other words, he was very overprotective of those he considered to be his family. If these remarks had been made by someone insignificant and unremarkable, then he might have been able to hold himself back. But it was difficult to restrain himself after hearing Rikyudo, the very person who had tormented Mari and gone after May, insulting them. But unlike Rikyudo, who was emanating death attribute mana and reciting an incantation for an offensive spell, he wasn't in a state of furious anger.
Now then, I'll leave Rikyudo to you.
Banda said to Amamiya.
So you're just going to provoke him and then leave the rest to me? Well, that was the plan all along.
Amamiya said.
Mechon and Mari will be supporting you.
Banda told him.
Papa, do your best.
said Mei, whose face and wand were sticking out of Banda's chest. With his daughter's support, Amamiya stepped forward to face Rikyudo once more.
You're no longer a threat to me.
Rikyudo roared, firing an arrow of blue-white flames and producing a whip made of the same flames. Both these attacks would sap the body heat of their targets and likely cause instant death if they landed.
That's a bit too arrogant of you,
said Amamiya, responding with a barrage of water attribute spells. Rikyudo's blue-white flames had no effect on his icy arrows and spears, which had no heat to begin with. But before the attacks reached Rikyudo, he produced a barrier.
My mastery over death attributes surpasses the undead Amamiya Hiroto. I can use every spell that he did.
Shouted Rikyudo as his magic absorption barrier erased Amamiya's offensive spells.
Damn it!
Cursed Amamiya, realizing that his attack had failed.
Life Radiant Sword.
He produced a blade that combined the light and life attributes. This was the spell that he had created as a countermeasure to the remnants of the 8th guidance. Previously, he had only been able to radiate this magic from his hands, but he was now able to contain it within his hands and use it as a close-range weapon. Maybe it's because of this suit, the spell is far more stable than when I used it with other magical media. This might work, Amamiya thought. The sword wielded by Amamiya extinguished the blue-white flames and severed Rikyudo's whip.
I see, it seems that you didn't neglect to improve your own skills. But you are the arrogant one, thinking that you could possibly overcome my magic.
Shouted Rikyudo. He conjured black lightning and crystals and sent them flying in Amamiya's direction. Every time Amamiya was forced to use his life radiant sword to strike down the attacks he couldn't avoid, his mana was being depleted.
Your anti-death attribute spell is impressive.
Rikyudo laughed.
But will it last until you can close the distance?
Now mekund,
said Banda.
Get up.
Said Mei. Rikyudo let out a startled shout as the floor beneath him suddenly disappeared. The wand-wielding Mei had made spirits possess the floor to turn it into a golem, then made it change shape.
A pitfall.
The hole was deep enough for the entirety of Rikyudo's lower half to fit in, but not so deep that he fell completely into the ground. But due to the sudden disappearance of the ground beneath his feet, he had lost his balance. This created enough of an opening for Amamiya to close the distance.
My kids are pretty amazing,
he remarked as he swiftly thrust his sword towards Rikyudo's head.
Damn you, since when have you been hiring a monstrosity as a private tutor for your kids?
Rikyudo shouted.
To tell you the truth, I have no idea.
Rikyudo immediately cast Magic Absorption Barrier to act as a shield, but Amamiya's anti-death attribute sword cut through it with ease, making it ineffective as anything other than a smokescreen. Rikyudo had always been capable of holding his own against Amamiya in physical combat, and now that he had the Archavalon body with superior physical capabilities, he had even surpassed him slightly. But even he wasn't capable of continuing to deflect Amamiya's sword, while his lower half was trapped in a hole, preventing him from moving. Although they were far from fatal, Amamiya's sword inflicted several wounds upon Rikyudo's body. Although the damage was far more shallow than that caused by Hiroshi's mana bullet, Rikyudo screamed as he felt the sharp pain of his wounds, and the blue-black blood flowing from them showed no signs of stopping. In his efforts to create a body that was suited to using death attribute magic, he had put too much death attribute mana into it. This had made it extremely vulnerable to attacks from Amamiya's life radiant sword.
Rikyudo-san!
Shouted Moria as he and Rikyudo's other subordinates tried to rush to his aid. But their paths were quickly blocked by their own opponents, Derek and the others.
Damn it, you're in our way.
Shouted the knight Nabeshima, using his space attribute armor to distort Iwao's bullets and spells as he tried to shake him off.
Right back at you.
Said Iwao, producing a hammer of gravity that couldn't be avoided even by distorting space and stopping Nabeshima in his tracks.
My children are doing their best out there too. I'm not going to lose face in front of them.
Said Narumi, safely blocking the enlarged bullets fired by the Isanboshi Yazaki by using a spell to conjure a wall.
You know I never liked you.
Said Yazaki, scattering pebbles at Narumi with earth attribute magic and enlarging them at the last second to catch her off guard. But Narumi had already predicted her attacks. She blocked them once more using a magic wall. The knight Nabeshima had a weakness due to the attribute and properties of his armor, and the armor was weak if this weakness was known. As for Yazaki's Isanboshi, this ability could only enlarge physical things. No matter how large they were, they could still be blocked by other physical objects. Of course, both of them were among the strongest bravers, even when these weaknesses were taken into account. Even though they had weaknesses, they had the skills and experience to make up for them. However, the same was true for their opponents, Iwao and Narumi. And although Nabeshima and Yazaki were supported by Rikudu's death attribute enchantments, Iwao and Narumi had the transformation equipment that had been given to them by Banda. And due to the high performance of that equipment, the Bravers had the advantage in this battle.
Shit, are there nothing but monsters in the Amamiya family?
Cursed the shaman Moriya. He looked like he was free, but all of his efforts were going into controlling the artificial spirits created by his cheat-like ability. Ifrit and Karen's movements were being suppressed by the efforts of Joseph and Yaodu. As for Emir, it was currently on the receiving end of a one-sided beatdown from Hiroshi.
Take this and this and this.
Hiroshi shouted as he simply swung his arms, relying on his sheer strength rather than having any kind of technique. But even so, these attacks were being performed by an enormous, monster-like suit of metal. Despite being specialized for defense, each of its attacks was fast and powerful. If Hiroshi's movements weren't so inefficient, Emir would have already been broken to pieces by now. Meanwhile, Bakker was being healed by Nanamori's Asclepius, and Yukijoro was already moving to help Joseph deal with Ifrit. Moriya and the others were in no position to aid Rikudu, and it was only a matter of time before they were the ones in need of aid.
We don't have enough people.
Moriya muttered, revealing Rikudu's weakness. If everything had gone according to plan, the Bravers should have been separated and unable to fight together as a gathered force. Even if he failed to eliminate Amamiya and the others, they should have all been in different places all over the world, unable to reunite unless they used international transport methods, which were under the control of Rikudu and his collaborators. But thanks to a monster that flew about while carrying a large van, Amamiya and the others had managed to gather and form a team. On the other hand, Rikudu's allies who had been dispatched separately to crush Amamiya and the others, Balor, Sleipnir, Ares, Artemis, and Sahedva, had all been killed, as had Kapi, who was one of the few individuals who could have turned this situation around. The experimental subjects should have served as disposable fighting forces, but some of them had turned traitor and they couldn't be used now. Needless to say, the undead couldn't be used either. Rikudu and his subordinates had tried to divide and conquer, but they had been crushed in return instead. As a result, they were lacking allies now. Rikudu had been drunk on his sense of omnipotence after successfully being reincarnated as Archavalon, while Moriya and the others were too busy worshipping the reborn Rikudu. As a result, they had forgotten the very important fact that they had been driven into a corner with no hope for escape. But Rikudu wouldn't let things end here.
Don't underestimate me.
He roared, producing an acidic mist with a death attribute spell. Amamiya instinctively put some distance between him and his enemy after sensing an irritating odor. Meanwhile, Rikudu, who had removed the limiters on his own brain, pushed his physical abilities beyond their limits to leap out of the hole in the ground.
You've used a spell that manipulates inanimate objects by turning them into undead. I can tell that much.
Said Amamiya. The undead had turned inanimate objects into undead. Even Mari wasn't able to do this, despite becoming the death attribute mage known as Black Maria. Rikudu believed that this was due to a lack of ability on Mari's part, or that it was perhaps because she was a failed creation. That was why he believed that now, as Archavalon, he would be able to use this spell.
Awaken and obey me.
He said. The floor and ceiling did not respond by turning into golems to attack Amamiya or Banda and the others who were watching the battle.
Why aren't they moving?
The floor and ceiling hadn't turned into golems and were completely motionless.
Mexican,
Said Banda.
Yeah, please wake up and obey me.
Said May, waving her wand. In the next moment, Rikyudu, who had frozen still in astonishment that his attempt to create golems wasn't working, had his legs grabbed by countless hands that appeared from the floor. A moment later, he groaned in pain as the ceiling dropped onto his head like a hammer. As the ceiling attempted to completely flatten him, he forcibly tore through the floor that was binding his legs in order to escape.
Why can that girl do it, while I, a perfect being, can't?
Rikyudu screamed hysterically, having suffered more mental damage than physical.
Why do you think anyone would listen to you, uncle? Everyone says they hate you.
May gave him a puzzled look. The spirits of the experimental subjects that Rikyudu had discarded after using them, the collaborators that he had killed just minutes earlier, and the soldiers he had been using as disposable pawns to guard the facility, were gathered around May and laughing at him. They were pleased to be of use to May and ridiculing the unsightly Rikyudu, her enemy. But Rikyudu couldn't see their sneering faces, nor could he hear their laughter.
Why can I not command spirits, even though my mana rivals that of the undead, and I have surpassed him in the ability to control it?
He could sense the presence of the spirits of the dead, but nothing more. He didn't know what they were thinking, what they asked for, or even whose spirits they were. All he knew was their locations and their numbers. This wasn't a problem with his body or his skill in magic. It was because he didn't recognize that the spirits of the dead should be distinguished from one another, and also because the spirits themselves didn't want him to know who they were. Using the status system of Lambda as an analogy, the Archavalon, Rikyudu, and Mari both lacked the death attribute charm skill. And after being reincarnated as Archavalon, he remained unaware of this fact as he wielded death attribute magic.
Why won't they obey me? Are you telling me that I am still imperfect? Me, Archavalon, imperfect.
Until this very moment, Rikyudu would never have even dreamed that he was imperfect.
it seems like you're coming apart,
Said Amamiya, swinging his sword without mercy at the hysterically screaming Rikyudu. Rikyudu immediately attempted to block it with a barrier, but it was futile. The life-radiant sword went straight through the barrier, grazed his cheek and sliced off his ear, causing him to scream in pain. It had taken everything he had just to bend his neck and protect his head. The previous Rikyudu would never have made such a move. Rather than using a spell of an attribute that was so clearly mismatched against his enemy, he would have used magic of another attribute to avoid the attack, and then regained a stable position. He had once possessed an affinity for all attributes except for the life and light attributes, as well as the time attribute which didn't exist in origin, and he had been skillful at using the correct spell for each situation. But now he only had the death attribute. In exchange for a vast quantity of mana and special qualities that didn't exist in other attributes of magic, he had lost his affinity for every other attribute. His adaptability and his methods of dealing with unexpected situations were gone.
How dare you wound my body? Eat this.
Rikyudu used a spell to produce poisonous smoke again in order to get some distance from Amamiya. Amamiya clicked his tongue in frustration, but he had no choice but to back off in order to avoid the poisonous smoke. Because his transformation equipment had been made by Vanilyu, it could protect him from death attribute magic to some extent. But it wasn't well prepared enough to deal with poison that had been created by magic. Because most people in Lambda dealt with poison through resistant skills, techniques for making equipment itself more resistant to poison weren't very well developed.
Megkun.
Banda said, prompting May again.
Okay, everyone get up.
Said May. She turned the floor into golems for the third time, but Rikyudu quickly leapt away before he could fall again.
How many times are you going to use the same?
Rikyudu muttered as he gave a hatred-filled glare towards May and the monstrosity possessing her. The moment he did, he realized something. His attention had been occupied by the relentless advances of Amamiya and the fact that May was rubbing his imperfection in his face, but he now realized that Mari was gone. And at the same time, he realized that someone was hiding near him, Mari, who had used metamorph to change the color of her body's surface to the same color as the walls and floors.
There you are.
Rikyudo filled his hand with a shockwave of death and enchanted his fist with strengthened lethality, then thrust it at Mari, who had been hiding and likely waiting for an opportunity to strike. Being hit by this fist would cause one's life force to be rapidly drained. Even Mari, who could duplicate her vital organs with metamorph, wouldn't be able to survive it.
Yes, I'm here.
It wasn't Mari that was hit by the fist, but Banda, who had changed the color of his body using the Demon King's ink sacs.
Now it's my turn.
With the claws on his 4 hands, he pierced both of Rikyudo's shoulders and both of his hands. At the same time, one pair of his jointed legs pierced Rikyudo's feet, pinning them to the floor. Rikyudo opened his mouth in a silent scream, unable to even make noise due to the agony of this pain. Mari, who had disguised herself as Banda with metamorph, returned to her normal appearance. In her arms, she was holding Mei, as well as a black-red treasure orb. She let out a big breath and started gasping for air.
That was tough, it's difficult to breathe, and my back hurts just from maintaining that posture. What a ridiculous body structure. Don't you think so, Mama?
But there's a lot of wriggles, and lots of eyes too.
Said Mei. Knowing that Rikyudo would assume that the monstrosity wouldn't leave Mei's side, Mari had disguised herself as Banda to allow Banda a chance to attack. Banda had traded places with her, handing Mei and a treasure orb of the Demon King in order to use mana transfer, and sneakily approached Rikyudo, who was dozens of meters away. This plan would have been easily foiled by warnings from the spirits if Rikyudo had the power to charm them. But now that things had come to this, both Amamiya and Banda thought that there was no hope for Rikyudo anymore. He couldn't escape the grasp of Banda, who was capable of tearing through steel as if it were made of candy, and none of his subordinates were able to come to his aid. Nabeshima had collapsed on the floor, out of mana, and suffering from a rapid growth of cancer cells caused by Bakr. Yukijoro, having extinguished Ifrit, had inflicted severe frostbite on Yazaki's entire body. With all 3 of his artificial spirits defeated, Moria was on his knees, his mana spent. All 3 were alive, but none of them could move. Banda's main body was busy nullifying Rikyudo's shockwave of death, but Banda believed that once he either etched a fear of himself into Rikyudo's soul and killed him, or took him outside to have his main body directly break his soul, the battle would be over. Thus, if one were to ask whether he had let his guard down, the answer would have to be yes.
I will not meet my end here. Not yet, not yet.
Rikyudo roared. Death attribute mana welled up within Rikyudo, more fiercely than ever before, and then he escaped from Banda's grasp by tearing off his own limbs at the shoulders and knees.